Alright guys, got a really fun one here today. It's going to be a bit of a weird video, but bear with me, a lot of lore to go through. So if you're out of the loop, Legendary Armory came in. They made it a lot more rewarding to make legendaries. One of the things that's a part of that update is after going to the Mystic Forge, creating the item, you get this big pop-up with this art. Here you can see, for example, I made the World vs. World back piece after the update, and they'll actually give you a little bit of extra lore about the legendary. So let's take stock. Legendaries kind of do have a bit of lore already, in as much as their precursor collection might teach you a bit, especially the first 3 Heart of Thorns legendaries, and then Chukra and Chumpawa afterwards as well, all had a lot of lore. Then for the remainder of Gen 2, there's a lot of like cool hints in the names of the precursors as they progress, but there's not too much to really dig into. Certainly not as much as Hope, Astralaria, Nevermore, and Chukra and Chumpawa had. So this update is actually given a lot more setting information and world building, which I'm eating up. I actually think the stuff that they're talking about here can give you a small insight into maybe where the studio's head is for future storylines. Some of the hints are really badass. In this video, I'm going to go through every single piece of legendary lore. Most of it has now been found by the community who have crafted new legendaries, taken screenshots and shared them. A lot of this information was data mined very soon after the patch, but we didn't necessarily know what text went to what legendary until the community went out there and crafted the stuff. I've just been told actually the wiki had what I think is a really cool policy where even though the data mined information existed, they never updated the page until the community actually found the thing. And so 99% of the information here I am pulling from the amazing efforts over on the Guild Wars 2 wiki. This is really their work, not mine. Let me be very clear. I just want to give you some insight as someone who knows the lore reasonably well and can give you guys a little bit of the background information sometimes where some of these things really captivate me. All of that said, there are a few entries that I couldn't find on the wiki and I still resorted to the data mined information. So this really is everything, and the devs did very well. Every legendary, no matter what you can think of, has a new description. The only place where they kind of copped out is when it comes to the legendary armor. There's no difference between an armor headpiece versus a shoulder piece versus a chest or whatever. It's all the same. But they do have unique text for the medium versus heavy versus light, and all of those versus PvE, World versus World, and PvP. So it's more than I was expecting, and I'm very thrilled with that. Footage in the background that you'll be watching as we focus mostly on these images that I've pulled from the wiki is probably just going to be me playing in Bifrost Frontier as of the new replay patch. Without further ado, let's kick this mother off. We're going to go with Gen 1 weapons first and alphabetical, as they've got it listed on the wiki. First then, that means the Bifrost. Casters and archivists alike worship the iridescent glow that the Bifrost emits. Although the source of its magic is unknown, its luminous aura may hint of realms bygone, tucked away in the mists. Immediately, they're talking a bit more about the mists because it's appropriate with the Bifrost. I would have expected a little bit of Jotun lore here, to be perfectly honest with you guys. But these kind of looks and nods towards the mist, I see the studio is doing a lot of right now, and I think it's really what they'll start focusing on after End of Dragons is done and we're beyond this Elder Dragon threat. Next, we have Bolt, interwoven with an impression of a dragon, whose name Tyria has yet to learn. Bolt is imbued with the strength of a storm, swelling inside like a thunderous inferno, eager to aid its wielder in combat. So we've actually read this in a recent video of mine. It seemed like a weird description because it might be hinting at the deep sea dragon, but actually, as many of you guys in the community pointed out, they could just be talking about any old lesser dragon, and you're going to see a description of a lesser dragon later as well, actually on 2 of these different legendaries, I think. I am kind of curious about the phrasing here, and a dragon whose name we are yet to learn. So one day we will. That dragon's still out there. That information is out there. Perhaps something to look out for in End of Dragons itself. Next, we got the Dreamer. This one's a fun one because it's like a joke legendary, and there are obviously a few, so the question is, how will they do the lore? The Dreamer is as mystifying as it is perplexing, for such a creature doesn't exist within the known world. They're talking, of course, about the unicorns that fly through the air, and not only are they just unicorns, but they are unicorns with a tramp stamp, ArenaNet tattoo logo on one of their arse cheeks. It doesn't exist within the known world. It's quite popular among the Skrit, though, who idolize its colorful ... prowess. Not one to look too deeply into here, but I think the devs played around with it quite well. The Flameseeker Prophecies, complete reverse of the Dreamer. This is a real artifact in the lore and something to be taken seriously. The Flameseeker Prophecies is an ancient tome containing the near-complete proclamations of the future as foreseen by the Dragon Glint. And the final chapter is intentionally left unwritten. You know, I have to go back and brush up on my Flameseeker Prophecies lore. Are we still technically in the scope of the Flameseeker Prophecies, or haven't they closed? I swear, didn't Prophecies end literally by saying, there you go, the Flameseeker Prophecies are done now? Or does everything about Glint's legacy in this Guild Wars 2 story still kind of include what she had written about? I do remember that in early Ascalon stuff, you could find like a scribe shouting and reading passages of it out. And was it in the Istan Daybreak release you could read a little bit more of the Flameseeker Prophecies in that library, or am I imagining that? In any case, it's interesting to see the devs with that ... there emphasize this idea of the final chapter being unwritten. Not great as a prophecy if it's not all written down, right? Talking about the future, let's move to the underwater ones here. Frenzy, I really love this one. Although the vast, impenetrable, unending ocean has been left unexplored for a century past, fishermen lingering just outside the expanse often catch glimpses of something magnificent. So, what could they be referring to here? I do think that the Unending Ocean may have a role to play around the End of Dragons era, not only because we have to cross the damn thing to get to Cantha, and they're saying it hasn't been explored for a century because since the Rising of Ore, really the idea has been that we were disconnected due to the activities of Zaitan and the other Elder Dragons. Not only will we be crossing it, but if we're dealing with a deep sea dragon who's presumably been around there a lot, they could play with this a lot. I've mentioned to you guys several times that I think an interesting concept for post End of Dragon story would be to look at the Lagos and kind of visit a massive Lagos city out in the water. And is that what they're catching glimpses of? Something magnificent? Would that make Frenzy, the harpoon gun, a Lagos artifact, something they use in their hunts? Or am I going off the deep end here? Let's look at Frostfang. Hilf travelled to the far Shiver Peaks to challenge Jormag. Near death, she took one last swing at her foe before falling unconscious. She awoke the next morning, her axe encased in an icy dragon's head. Bit of a mystery as to how that happened. As far as I know, this Norn Hilf hasn't really been mentioned before. I did run a search on the wiki, it got no hits. Howler. A Norn, once again, Ballad recounts a quarrel between the Great Wolf and a serpent who sought to become a spirit of the wild. Oh, little snake, do you have what it takes? Howl, howl, open the gates. Surely what they're trying to say is the serpent wanted to become a greater spirit of the wild. Like, the Norn do believe in spirits of the wild for a lot of these lesser creatures. It's just they're not, you know, what the Great Lodges are after, and so many Norn really give a massive damn about. But this is definitely fun to think about, and if you're a big believer that Mother has something to do with the spirits of the wild, or Coda is a spirit of the wild and all that stuff, that there'll be a really tight tie between the stories of the Icebrood Saga and where the Elder Dragon story ultimately ends up. You might want to look at this one closely, remember it. Incinerator, my first legendary. I was very curious what they'd go with here. It's Charlor. I know this isn't the path you'd have chosen for yourself, but the Flame Legion isn't just your home now, it's my gift to you. Keep this dagger close and never forget who you are. Nonius Rage Singer. Nonius, again, is a new character, a character that hasn't been referenced anywhere else. No idea who it is that's offering this line, or who Nonius was that wielded the Incinerator themselves. It's pretty advanced technology. You know, the Incinerator is kind of just like a massive lighter, right? So I would assume that this was a recently built artifact in the story, and therefore this quote we're reading here is among Char that may be alive today. This could be Gaheron's Flame Legion that we're hearing about right now, and both characters could step into the story later. I probably said his second name wrong as well. That's probably Rage Singer, not Singer. Singer probably makes a lot more sense. And what's this? They didn't choose the Flame Legion for themselves, but it isn't just their home. It's their gift. I'm very curious about this one. Probably a bit of bias because it was my first legendary. I'm sure many of you guys watching this video are waiting for that moment where your first legendary comes up too, if it hasn't already. The Juggernaut, a reference to a great era of Guild Wars lore. A relic dating back to the age of the Giganticus Lupicus. The Juggernaut may be a gift from the gods. When held by a worthy champion, they are cast in a solid sheet of quicksilver. This is actually a really good example of what I hoped a lot of the lore would be like really reference those ancient ages. I was holding my tongue hoping that, like, for example, Samurog would be explained a little bit more maybe here, especially when it came to the spear, Komahari Kataki. But it's not. Samurog isn't talked about anywhere. Look, if they do spears for End of Dragons and there's a legendary spear coming up that in Gen 3, then maybe we'll get it at that point. But yeah, the Giganticus Lupicus talked about a bit there. And the Quicksilver. Now, this is fun to me because when I think about, like, those ancient ages and what was going on back in Ore and so on, I think about the Pyrite Peninsula and all that auric stuff that's going on. And here we've got like this reference about Quicksilver as well. These arts of like transmutation and metallurgy, they always feel like lost ancient magical arts in the Guild Wars universe. And here we have the Juggernaut tying back to there. Kudzu. When second-born Lonicera, again, new character, sacrificed herself to protect the Pale Tree, a small root sprung from the ground where she breathed her final breath. That root take the shape of a mighty bow. Lovely little story. I don't think we have to read too deeply into this one. It's just strong, fun world building. Kratekin. Now this one's bizarre. This might be a place where my lawfu has let me down, and you might want to look in the comments on this, guys. Here's a quote from someone. Who is saying this? We don't know. But they say, I've studied the Crate for some time, but never have I seen anything else quite like that. One of their shamans performed a ritual on one of their dead. Undeniably dead. And it was living once again. Now, this is really fun. The whole thing about the Crate and the Oratus and their prophets and their beliefs and their mysterious obelisks on the seafloor, that's all really, really rich stuff that I want to dive a lot more into. It's not just about the Lagos in the Unending Ocean, it's these guys. And as far as I remember from any prior Crate lore, they've never talked about the idea of the Crate being able to fully raise the dead like this. Now remember, yeah, full resurrections happened a lot amongst the humans in Guild Wars 1, when like Grenth willed it to be so. But generally in Guild Wars 2's era, dead is dead a lot of the time. Resurrection is hard. You know, you can't bring air back. When you go down in combat, you're just defeated. If Timey dies from her disease, she's gone. You know, it's a serious thing. And here we have the Crate still living in that kind of Guild Wars 1 world. Or at least some Crate, not the ones we've interacted with. Now that's fun, especially in the context of like what they did against Zaitan and their access to the blue orb, another really powerful artifact. I feel like there's a lot of unexplored depth to the Crate and just what they're capable of and their deeper history that I'm really keen to see one day. Okay, speaking of the spear, Kamahali Kataki, a historian once wrote of a great beast that lurked off the coast of Or, possibly a living champion of Zaitan. Although she hasn't been seen for a century past, her kin still roam the dark waters. So don't forget, this is the spear that when you crit, like a shark comes out and bites people, there are lots of big risen undead sharks around. Even the first word here, Kamahali, that's like Hawaiian mythology for a giant shark god. Here I feel like, because I haven't read the novel for a long time, I might be missing out on a reference to Sea of Sorrows. Maybe there's a giant undead shark in there, and that's what we're actually kind of hinting at and talking about on this one. Again, more stuff about the waters. I suppose that's only natural with the underwater legendary weapons, which don't exist for Gen 2 and isn't really relevant for the other categories of legendaries, so there you have it, guys. Enjoy them. Meteorlogicus, another one that I made very early on in my gameplay. Meteorlogicus was designed by a Sylvari astrologer, Surya, a love letter to the sky. She once used the Ori to trace a thunderous cloud that lurked on the horizon. She knew then a dragon had awoken. Okay, so unlike before, this is definitely not talking about a lesser dragon. This is talking about an elder dragon. This is Kraukatoric's awakening, for sure. I would love to meet this Sylvari and actually see the Meteorlogicus in their hands. That would be awesome. It's also really intriguing to me to think about such a badass item that is very, very recently created and by one of the newest races on the planet too. I mean, this is Sylvari. It never kind of gave me Sylvari vibes before, but I totally buy that, you know, these are very, very intelligent race, you know, second only to the Asura, according to the Asura themselves. I like what little background that adds there. Next, we have the Minstrel, kind of a joke weapon. Here they say the minstrel is a bard's dearest companion, a vessel of their spirit and artistry. Delicate notes fade in the wielder's wake, leaving passers-by with a gentle whisper of their vestige. Just quite pretty. Now, I know some of you guys are going to be tempted to say there, oh my god, bard, elite specialization coming. You know, it's possible. They could do it if they wanted. I don't know whether this is necessarily a knowing hint towards that. If it is, and End of Dragons comes out, I mean, I'm sure we'll look back at it. I'm actually thinking of doing a video that compiles all of the possible elite specialization hints they might have done at the moment. We were talking about it on the Spud Discord recently. If you guys want to contribute to that conversation, you can click the link in the description. Next, we've got the Moot. Again, definitely a joke one here. Dare this historian say the Moot should only be brandished by the most charismatic of warriors. When drawn, your foe may be blinded by its grandiose display of light and splendor. Over to the Predator. Cast in the likeness of Forge Ironstrike, this rifle was crafted as a tribute to his battle against the Flame Imperator. When Karla fell in the plains of Golghain, Ironstrike silenced the traitor. So they've actually expanded a little bit on this story here. Those out of the loop, in Guild Wars 1 you have this child companion called Pyre. His granddaughter kind of architected the overthrowing of the old Flame Legion, the oppressive Flame Legion that kept all female char out of the conflict and so on. When you play a renegade revenant, it's her that you're communing with, and it's her warband that you summon as spirits with those skills. Anyway, so she had to curry favor of the other legions, and she got this guy, Forge Ironstrike, the at the time Iron Imperator, on her side, and he was with her. Now the story goes that after basically she beat all of the Flame Legion said, okay, we surrender. They go right up to her. They say, okay, you win. And then they assassinate her. They gut her. And she dies saying, oh, my sisters will be free. And that's basically how the story ended as we knew it. Well, this legendary lore information reveals that the Iron Imperator Stan sees that happen. And what does he do? He shoots the Flame Legion assassin in the head. Now that's pretty cool. And you can have the gun itself. This is actually one of the only Gen 1 legendaries that I really want and still don't have. Quip, speaking of legendaries I don't have, the most renowned thief in Crota had a couple of calling cards that drove the Lion Guard mad. She always left two things behind, a trail of confetti and a note that read, I can run faster than a centaur. Perfectly jokey and fun, and conjures all of these images to me of like a real thriving city, Old Lion's Arch, as it's depicted in Sea of Sorrows, as it was at launch. Fun stuff. Rodgort. Okay, so we've always known, okay, Rodgort written backwards is Trogdor, who is, correct me if I'm wrong, a big D&D dragon. And it's a very specific reference. In fact, this comes from Guild Wars 1 as well. Guild Wars 1 had some elementalist skills, like Rodgort's Flame, which was referencing that. It became a legendary in the sequel. And here we have when Kutha woke. I don't actually know what race that potential character would be. He was greeted by the sounds of panic and flame. He ran to the window just in time to witness a dragon perch on a nearby rooftop. Rodgort, they whispered. Rodgort is my name. Now, I guess it's possible that this whole thing is still alluding to and referencing the D&D side of things, which I would be unfamiliar with. I just want to open the door to that. You guys can let me know in the comments. I'd be fascinated to see it. Okay, rounding out Gen 1 now, we have the 3 greatswords, and I was very curious what they do here. They actually tied it to the human god lore, starting off with Sunrise. It is said that when Dwayne awoke each morning, she gifted her followers with the warmth of dawn. All of the creatures interior stirred from their slumber to witness the glorious sunrise. Very beautiful, evocative. Twilight, on the other hand. So we had Dwayne for Sunrise, her son Grenth for Twilight. While the other gods slept, Grenth took up his throne, beckoning his companions to dance and howl beneath the stars. It was said that his powers were the most potent when the moon was highest in the sky. I love these insights into what, you know, awe might have been like when the gods lived there. Beautiful. You know, guys, in many ways, I kind of don't want to see awe as it was at its height, because reading little snippets and stuff like this is so much more poetic and evocative to me than anything that some in-game engine patch could ever offer. And then finally, Eternity, which actually, this might be one of the biggest lore bombs of them all. Although the gods have abandoned Tyria, their gifts remain. The oceans and land, the verdant forests, the limitless cosmos beyond, the ultimate love letter to the living, but also a solemn goodbye. So this is obviously tapping into the idea of the gods stepping away. You know, one of the big places the story might go once the Elder Dragon is done is we could be looking at the gods again, bringing them back. I know that's not everyone's cup of tea, but it could be something they do. Here's what I find interesting. The lore's always been a little bit hazy and a little bit curious. When they say, like, the gods made Tyria, and, you know, they shaped Tyria to be great for all life and stuff, the assumption, therefore, is, like, they mean the planet Tyria. The gods didn't do anything else. They did something with the planet here. But I guess you could also say, look, this whole realm within the mist, Tyria's realm, that means Tyria itself, but also all the other planets in the solar system, the moon we see in the sky, all these kind of elements of Guild Wars lore that have not been expanded on very well at all. The limitless cosmos beyond. Are they saying the gods made all of that? Are they saying that just the humans believe that the gods made all of that? You know, when we talk about the gods making this place, did they mean the whole realm? And did they therefore make the whole realm... Did Balthazar make the whole realm of the Fissure of Woe? And did Dwayna make her whole Paradise-style realm? Did Lyssa make her... Like, I really want more kind of tangible answers here, because it sounds like the studio believes, at least, we have to assume that this lore has some authority, right? That it's the whole realm. These are the kind of big questions I want ironed out. Anyway, I think that's a really interesting one, Eternity. I'd always kind of believed, and all the lore we'd had before, that the gods really, when it says the gods made Tyria, it meant like the physical planet. They didn't necessarily make the moon. They didn't make the sun. They didn't make all that stuff, the whole solar system. But now I'm kind of wondering. Let's move into Gen 2 now, and starting with a very special one, Astralaria. So Astralaria is one of the 4 where there's actually already a lot of story if you've crafted it through the collections. I've never crafted this axe, so I'm a little bit more flimsy on the details. What I will say before we read this lore is I actually had a pretty grumpy message from one of you guys in my comment sections saying you didn't like this lore because through actually crafting it yourself, you felt like it was this really profound special thing, and that now this lore kind of made it seem less so. But let's see what we got. Sunsmith Weasel dreamed she gifted an exquisite axe to a woman with a skin like the star-kissed sky above the Astralarium. She woke and ran to her workbench, a delighted laugh lingering in her memory. So my take on this is I actually quite enjoy this. First of all, that is referencing an NPC we can interact with. It's from the Daybreak release. At the actual Astralarium, you can go and you can find Weasel. They do a lot of the collection dialogue for all the Astral and Stellar weapon collections that you can do as a part of that patch. But then later on, this totally feels to me like they're talking about the weird celestial creatures you occasionally find in Path of Fire when you drop down the Dwarven Mine. There's like weird celestial creatures. You've got like the Harbinger in the challenge moats in Fractals. And of course you've got in the Shattered Observatory, Astaratoriv, right? Or Virastarvar, depending on if you're doing CM or not. Her name is reversed or not. That's totally who they're talking about, right? That whole like species, that whole race, those entities, whatever they are incredibly fascinating to me. My Guild Wars Mysteries series, I actually have penned in. I want to do a mini Mysteries episode just talking about them, and I can put this lore in that now as well, because it looks like the devs want us to think about them just a little bit, maybe. Or they just saw that, you know, the axe has the same kind of visual scheme as that, so they tied them together. Who knows? Next, we have Ipos. This is one I was excited about. I'm actually a little bit underwhelmed here. All right, you guys know me. I like the demony stuff. I like the dark stuff. I like the grim stuff, the edgy things. The Binding of Ipos. It's a Necronomicon, guys. It gives you a giant demon hand. Who's the demon? What does the tome say? Where is it from? These are all the questions I wanted the legendary lore to be on. Here's what it says. The Binding of Ipos is as mystifying as it is venomous, dripping with ancient knowledge. Any warrior brave enough to carry this tome will be gifted with a millennia of sinister magics. Oh, come on. It sounds like they don't really have an idea of anything deeper about this. So this is like one of those descriptions that is just describing what we already have. Bit disappointed. I suppose we've got this idea of venom in there, which maybe adds a new dimension. It's a shame, but there it is. Chukun Champua, of course, a beautiful story. And, you know, you really can't expect too much of an expansion on this one. They just kind of have a nice closing moment for the collection. Probably really fun to do this and see this final message pop up out of the Mystic Forge now. Thanks to their bond with you, someday Nola, Halcor, and Brill will be magnificent tigers, facing the world with dignity and wisdom. For now, their paws are far too big for them. This is kind of fun to think about the idea of like a Guild Wars 3 that's set another 100 years in the future. You might find that these tigers have accomplished great feats. As far as the Guild Wars 2 story is concerned, I don't know whether I'll ever look back at them. This does remind me though that you can get that unique cosmetic where they're on your back and it can overlap with your backpack. I should play some Fashion Wars with that. Next we've got Claw of the Carner. Again, we already know so much about this. What more could they possibly add? This ancient Char relic has served as an apparatus of revolution, a key to power, and a symbol of stability. The Claw of the Carner is reforged with every great feat its wielders accomplish. That last line's quite interesting. I almost wouldn't have been surprised if this was a very brief synopsis of the novel Ghost of Ascalon. They could have got away with that. Eureka. This might be my favorite. Here we are. I just very recently crafted Eureka. Eureka's like one of those super rare legendaries. I actually, on a stream, I think, talked about how underwhelming it is visually. Like, the footsteps are almost impossible to see and so on. I understand why this is one of the rarest legendaries. That's kind of one of the reasons I went for it, after all, in the end. But listen to this lore here. Ready? Eureka was the pride and downfall of a rogue, Priory research team. First of all, let's just say, how cool is it to think about a rogue Priory research team? But they set out to reactivate obsidian shards sampled from ancient armor. Paired with Magitech, the material assumed a deadlier form. You know what that's hinting at there, guys? That's hinting at obsidian armor from Guild Wars 1. Eureka is reforged obsidian armor. People who never played the first game, what you should understand is the equivalent to a legendary weapon in the first game was armor. The obsidian armor sets were ludicrously expensive. They just offered a cosmetic, and a lot of the time as well, the cosmetic wasn't even anything very flashy. It was a huge amount of work, underpinned the entire meaning behind the ectoplasm and obsidian shard economy in that game. It was the be-all and end-all. Very expensive. And, well, you know, if you're going to try and get it back in Guild Wars 2, because they didn't really hit that bar when it came to Guild Wars 2's legendary armor, Eureka is reforged from that obsidian shard. I love that. Exordium! Gen 2 Greatsword, last one to be added. Explorers venture into the mists, and sometimes the mists venture back. Though far less sentient than the mist being Razza, Exordium takes some joy in adapting to its wielder's needs and expectations. So it's almost kind of like this, got this limited consciousness. A sort of primitive intelligence within the weapon. I like that, and of course people will get a kick out of a reference to Razza. Razza is one of those things that people always ask to come back and are interested in. To me, it's like, I don't think they should do Razza, because Razza really is just Data from Star Trek The Next Generation. He basically lives to dump out twists of quotes from that guy. I think that would look a bit goofy in Guild Wars 2, especially in the context of like a deep exploration of the mists. But more things like Exordium totally works. That would be fun. Flames of War, another very rare legendary, one I actually have here. Most people call it the birthday cake. In lieu of written records, some temples of Balthazar kept elaborate weapons depicting the rituals they were used in. Few survived Balthazar's fall, and many were immolated by his loyalist priests. This is kind of fascinating to me, because this is legendary lore that is alluding to events that just occurred. And it's weird to think that, technically speaking, this is a Heart of Thorns weapon. You know, you could be in the start of Season 3 and the twist of Balthazar coming back and stuff hasn't been done. You could craft this and then it's like, wait, what? This is a spoiler. Obviously, that's a completely unrealistic, silly idea to entertain at this point. But it does open up some interesting doors that once the End of Dragons set comes out, you might find that the End of Dragons sets refer to events about End of Dragons itself. And I think that's a fun thing that the studio will actually be able to play with. Next, we got the HMS Divinity. Oh, I love this one, guys. This one's dark, okay? Maybe I'm interpreting it wrong, but this is beautifully dark, okay? And I kind of want to craft it just because of this lore here. As Zaitan's influence grew, the Vigil raced to the site of Kryta's greatest maritime tragedy on an improbable mission. The HMS Divinity's long-dead crew, shackled to their ship as it sank, were all recovered. Okay, so what is this saying? First of all, it's kind of introduced the whole idea of an extra story that was going on during the Zaitan conflict. Don't forget, the Vigils is only 5 years old. So, you know, what is this, a year before Guild Wars 2 started? Maybe it even was going on during the events of Claw Island and stuff. You know, you can decide that for yourself. But what are they saying here? The crew is shackled to the ship sinks near ore. Zaitan's influence starts growing, and the Vigil realizes that Zaitan is going to corrupt all of those corpses, bring them back to life, and they're going to have a Black Pearl situation. They're going to have an undead HMS Divinity sieging them as they're all shackled to the goddamn ship. So they go out and race to grab the ship and all of the bodies to keep it away from Zaitan. It says that they were all recovered. Now that is very cool. There's actually a story in the early personal story that talks about something kind of similar, right? When you play as a human. But this is beautiful. These are the kind of dark, kind of adult, twisted stories that I want Guild Wars to talk about a lot more of. Next, and unless I'm misinterpreting that, are they saying something much more banal? You guys can let me know. Next, we've got Hope. Again, one that people can spend a lot of time crafting. Remember, the blue stuff is the alchemical catalyst, and the red stuff is the transcendent energy. Don't drink either of them, and whatever you do, don't drop this thing. Not sure who that's a quote from. Is that revealed in the regular crafting? And Nevermore. Nevermore is a living reminder that there's always a purpose to Raven's riddles and tests. When you're mired in despair, lost for answers, he pushes you, because he knows you can fly. I'm actually pleasantly surprised here. I was expecting a kind of a jokey, story alluding to the fact this was a reference to Guild Wars 1 and so on that they often talked about in the streams. But no, they went for something more tangible. Lots of fun. Faris, I'm a big fan of this too. There's a bit of a typo here that you might see, depending on how much ArenaNet cares about this stuff, and I want to feel like they care a lot about this stuff. Hopefully we'll see a patch to this typo. Faris. Scholars discovered Faris in Siren's Reef. All attempts to store and catalogue it have failed. If not carried by a hero, it reappears at Dwayna's reliquary among the other artifacts. So the essence of this story I love. Really, really fun. And it's just a cool longbow too, for what it's worth. But the typo, the issue, is they say Siren's Reef. I'm pretty sure they mean Siren's Landing. Siren's Landing is the area of ore with all of the reliquaries with the artifacts of the gods. Siren's Reef is the fractal set much further north around, you know, the Blood-Tide coasts and the Sea of Sorrows, presumably. That's the Pirates of the Caribbean fun-loving romp adventure. The other one is in ore, and the Dwayna's reliquary is there. So hopefully they'll take that in the future, but a cool idea for an artifact. Sharur, still talking about ore. Sharur was retrieved among the spectral weapons guarding the source of ore. Though its lingering corruption is aimless and benign, not even the artesian waters could fully cleanse it. I adore this one too, because it would have been very easy for them to have said, oh, this is just in one of the other reliquaries maybe. But no, they actually went back to the personal story, those final moments. They talked about the source of ore again. They talked about the artesian waters, which, you know, I feel like are big beats that have never had enough supplementary material shining a light on. And that's exactly what Shara does. I kind of want a little bit more on it, but I think that criticism just comes down to the fact they're only giving us one paragraph instead of two. They've chosen to be really bite-sized here. You know, if I'm looking at Total War Warhammer and you mouse over some lore in that game, it's like 10 paragraphs for every little thing you have. That feels like a fantasy franchise that has a ton of weight and world building behind it. Of course, I'd prefer to be in that world, but baby steps. ArenaNet again there. Next, we have the Shining Blade. To its namesake faction, the Shining Blade is more an old friend than an ancient seer artifact. Its historical codenames include the family heirloom, or that old thing, and Gran's best knife. I feel like this has been inspired by something in real life somehow. But, of course, we already knew a lot about the backstory to the Shining Blade. It's just a nice little bit of expansion there. Shushadu, I was very curious what they'd say here, because Shushadu's kind of like a joke legendary. I mean, come on, it's a quaggan in a fishbowl. They, probably quite wisely, have avoided describing how it can actually work as a shield. You know, surely that glass would shatter. It's just super strong glass, guys, okay? So here's what they say. The tiny quaggan Shushadu has made up their mind to follow in your footsteps as champion of Tyria. You'll need to carry them until their stride is a bit longer. So wait, is the idea it's a baby quaggan? Shushadu's a baby quaggan and it's growing up, right? It's a little bit like the Chukra and Chumpawat lore there. I think that's cute. Verdurak, another edgy thing. I've got to craft this at some point, really. I love this warhorn. When Grenth's powers were raw and new, he crafted a weapon more sinister than he intended. Verdurak summons victims of horrific battles as vengeful wraiths, eager to conscript the newly slain. What a cool description there. You know, they almost could have made this a Doom artifact or something. That would have been badass too. But God, that makes me want it more. And finally, Ziquatl. This is the last Gen 2 weapon. Hylic of the Astralaria Forelands. So that's the center of Sparkfly Fen, for what it's worth, which also is kind of the biggest concentration of Hylic and Hylic civilization we've really got so far in the game, especially for core. Maybe the lines blur when we talk about the Itzal and the New Hawk over in Hearthorns. Anyway, Hylic of the Astralaria Forelands revere the life serpent Ziquatl. While it's too small and gentle to be their savior, those traits make it Ziquatl's perfect opposite, and a potent symbol of hope. Remember, these Hylic are living in the shadow of the dragon. It terrorizes the coast continually. They named Ziquatl itself. So you've got Ziquatl and then Ziquatl. I like that. It feels like this lore, this idea for the scepter has existed for a long time just behind the scenes, and finally they get an opportunity to talk to us about it. Alright, so with all the weapons done, let's round out with some of the weirder legendary categories. There's not a lot to talk about on some of them, but there are a few points of intrigue. First, we have the Perfected Envoy Helmet. So this is heavy PvE. And it says, this armor is worn only by those who help to defeat Zera and silence the White Mantle in the depths of the Forsaken Thicket. When it catches the sun just right, it's a beacon of hope in a cruel world. Just kind of a description of what we did in the raids. Then you have the medium. The heavy is what we just saw a second ago. Medium, a symbol of cunning and patience. This garb carries power siphoned from a mysterious beast guarding the Forsaken Thicket. They seem to pulsate, albeit gently, when nearing a ley line. And finally, we have light. These vestments are imbued with the power of a crystalline heart, once carried through an abandoned prison to its final resting place. It is exemplary of the wearer's tenacity in the face of darkness. So I guess they're talking about Saul and Bastion of the Penitent there, right? One of my bigger disappointments here that they're not talking about the envoys. I mean, come on, all these collections and stuff were themed around the envoys and like death and all that kind of stuff. And then they don't do anything? End of Dragons, maybe? Now, there is lore for the PvP and the World versus World stuff, but I don't think the wiki has quite uploaded it at the moment or sorted it out. So I'm actually going to grab that from Shaman's Datamine post in a second. Before that, let's stay with the wiki and look at the 3 back pieces. First, Fractals. This is definitely one to sit up and pay attention to. Log 18204. Losing transmission. Something went wrong. I'm stranded. I'm stuck in Fractal. Floating. The whole island is floating. Call themselves Forgotten Trees. I see someone. Can you hear me? All right, guys, I'm convinced that it might not be the very next expansion after End of Dragons, but the one after that. I'm convinced that we're going to Zoteka at this point. I think this is a Zoteka reference. I think they're talking about the floating island there, the moving island or whatever. Don't forget that everything they described about Zoteka and what that expansion, as far as the campaign would have been for Guild Wars 1, that there was going to be a big Forgotten influence there. We do see a lot of the Forgotten around in the Mists. We, of course, did see a lot of them in the Realm of Torment too, at the God's behest in Guild Wars 1. I think that's what's being alluded to here. I mean, what else? You might say, okay, is this Ark? Is he stuck in the Fractals? Was this a little part of his story there? But what's all this about the Forgotten and stuff? Well, I mean, maybe it could be both. Maybe it could be Ark, who was in the Fractals, and for a moment he saw this, but then, you know, he kind of just moved on. Really, really cool. And listen, I want to see a golden Fractal back piece at some point, and I want to see an Abyssal Fractal back piece at some point, both like legendaries that you can build through that game type. I think that would add a ton more stuff, and I'd love to see what lore they add if they did those. That would be amazing, right? And finally, the PvP one. Not one to set up to really here. A handful of warriors know what it's like to bask in the effervescent glow of a fresh victory. Sweat dripping from their brow, voice raw. Only the bravest ascend to such glory. I think they were really boring about the PvP side stuff, to be honest. Warbringer here with World vs. World. Warbringer is made from the salvage remnants of enemies fallen, emblazoned with swords and spears, pulled from still warm corpses. It is a reminder of battles won and lost. Whispers of victory. Let's look at the trinkets. We've got Aurora. So Aurora came from playing the Season 3 stuff. So naturally it's about Heart of Thorns and Heart of Thorns appending. So they say, when Morgemoth's power seeped into the earth, some sought to harness it, control it, bringing forth new dangers. Heroes faced those enemies head on with a spark of bravery and a warrior's might. Coalescence is the raiding one. And remember, this is the POF wings that weren't magnetite shards. They walked through the underworld, dove straight into the Mystic Forge. They crossed through the long-forgotten halls of Adashim. Such feats would be cast in gold and told to awestruck children. So not much new or to latch onto there. You might think all the trinkets are the same, but here we have Vision. And wow, Vision seems to be talking about the future a bit. I mean, really, this is definitely something to speculate over. Vision is Season 4. And it's POF appending. So what's the big moment at the end of POF? Balthazar dies. And here's what they say. We already had a little bit with the Gen 2 torch. It's a quote from someone. Who's speaking, guys? Who's speaking? They killed him. Balthazar. If Lyssa ever learns of this, I don't know what she'd do. What any of them would do. They still claim benevolence. But let's hope they weren't watching too closely. Wow, this is someone talking about us killing Balthazar. And how that might tick off the other gods. This is pretty goddamn interesting. There's a lot of holes and a lot we can talk about with what went on with POF and what the gods' true motivations and so on are. But look at how they are still teasing us about the Lyssa thing. I'm telling you guys, that Lyssa's mirror story, the fact that Balthazar specifically doesn't call out her name as he's dying, that idea that there's something more going on between those two, the devs are aware of it. They're aware of that plot hole right now. I think End of Dragons is going to explain it to us, and boy, is it going to be a fun one. These two dragons we see in the End of Dragons logo, the duality of Lyssa, a weird story about her taking water in the period between the two games. Oh, Lyssa's my favorite goddess, and the devs seem to have something special in store with her, and a special relationship that she had with Balthazar. I'm really happy with this vision description. Very fun. And who knows, what will she do when she finds out that we killed Balthazar? That'd be such a great thing to tie into End of Dragons, to make that story continue to have meaning. And it already has a lot, given its role in Aurine's Ascension. Right, then the other two trinkets, really these ones aren't so fun. Transcendence. This is the PvP amulet. The amulet was a sight to behold, swinging back and forth while the warrior perfected the swing of her sword. She was a champion. Onlookers bowed as they passed, but her attention was elsewhere. What's that? Looking for a gizmo? By the way, they never added special lore for all of the PvP gizmos, which I think's a shame, because they technically are legendaries. Come on, ArenaNet, you should let people be enthusiastic about those gizmos. It would build up the PvP scene a lot if they were more evident. And in a lot of the ways, they feel like artifacts, just as much as these rings and things do. And lastly, Conflux from World vs. World. The ring was fixed on his left hand, a reminder of the battle days before. While they held Stone Mist, it could be minutes until their enemies appeared at the front gate, and there was no time for mourning. That's, of course, all of the trinkets we can currently equip. Don't forget, though, that there's one coming up at the end of this replay, the new amulet, the PvE amulet, and you can data mine the information about it. Here's what it says: with wounds still fresh, the illusionist sat at the edge of the arena, weak, panting. Little did she know she was about to be named champion. So who might they be referencing there? It's an illusionist? Is this kind of another Lyssa type thing? Honestly, I'm a little lost off the top of my head on what to tether that to. There are runes and sigils also, so back to the wiki for this lovely art. By the way, the art here, that is actual New Crichton in that book, but if you translate the New Crichton, it's just garbled mess, and it doesn't really say anything. It did occur to me that it might be a cipher. You might want to run like the Cipher of the Gods from the Path to Revelations Guild Wars 1 quest line through it or something. I did do that, and it doesn't really come up with anything, so hey, who knows. The runes, it says Lady Nari once wrote that runes are imbued with the memories of ancient warriors, and that the effects they grant are remnants of their power. This is very generic, but I mean, they kind of have to be very generic on this. You can ask yourself, who's Lady Nari? They've never appeared in any of the games. They're also quoted on the sigil here, where she's quoted as saying, "I believe that sigils contain fragments or memories from the greatest battles in Tyria's history," Lady Nari wrote. "This one may be our only window into the Battle of the Three Queens." So this is actually really fascinating, because this is Luxon lore. And with End of Dragons, they might expand on this. One of the coolest things about the Luxon, I mention this at every opportunity I can get, they didn't just believe in the 6 human gods, or 5 human gods as we knew it back then, because Abaddon was hidden away, and Cormyr hadn't risen yet. But they had 3 extra ones as well. They were like demigods. They were called Allura, Elora, and Lone, or Lone. And Guild Wars 1 like introduced that idea, but never talked to us any further about it. And here we have this, talking about the idea that, you know, they had some kind of a battle. Very curious. So, as I mentioned, let's finally finish up the video by looking at the data mined information for the World vs. World and PvP armor. And it's weird because some of this is doubled up, and I actually think one of the descriptions is missing. Maybe a bug, maybe just a consequence of the data mining, and nobody really ever makes this kind of armor. You know, it's a huge time getting World vs. World, and nobody really plays PvP. Sadly, as it is, you know, let's be real, and many of us who do, we just spend those currencies on llamas. So here's what the mining says. This powerful soldier's armor pulses with mist energy. When you wear it on the upper floor of Stone Mist Castle, sometimes your chest aches with pride and agony. For the medium, this sturdy adventuring suit glows with mist energy. When you wear it inside the Obsidian Sanctum, sometimes you catch yourself longing for a forbidden reunion. By the way, I don't think these are actual hints for things to do in the game. And finally, this suit of armor is melded from the helms of wearers' opponents, a reminder of the battles won. There's something bittersweet about the way it smells, like clashing swords and sweaty palms. That one's the heavy World vs. World. And for PvP, I can only find 2. For light, it's this exquisite scholarly garb shimmers with mist energy. When you wear it through ruins and unguarded keeps, sometimes you're haunted by nostalgia. I mean, that sounds world versus worldy a little bit as well. And then this garb is the perfect blend of lightweight and sturdy. Ideal for the sneakiest saboteur. This is medium. Their enemies may cry foul play, but I assure you, only those with a swift foot possess such finery. Something about that, to me, smells like an allusion to thieves stealthing and ganking with quick backstabs and stuff. I don't know. But there you have it, guys. All the legendary lore. Reading it back to back was definitely a lot of fun for me. Don't forget, the Path of Fire did very well with item flavor text and stuff like this as well. I really want to see the devs continue down these roads, keep dumping this stuff in. Just the more you can, even if each piece itself is only bite-sized, makes Tyria come to life, makes it feel like a real place. And just, again, one of the biggest problems with Guild Wars 2 and creating a rich setting and telling rich stories is just a matter of quantity. Updates like this add story, add setting building, and that's the best thing they can possibly do. So let me know what each other's thoughts are down below, guys. I'll be watching the comments very closely, and please, if you enjoyed this video, feel free to share it, feel free to support it. I do want to make sure as many people get at this lore and enjoy it as they can. You might assume that everything I make is instantly shared, but honestly, recently, not so much. And I'll be back for more discussion about it on End of Dragons Daily and my other videos coming up. So thank you all. I hope you enjoy. Have a wonderful evening. Take care of yourselves, and I'll see you next time.